Well, I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode. Welcome to the show.
I think today's episode is going to relate to a lot of parents. Are you worried that your kids won't find a spouse?
Hey, this is a common worry today, and we dig into it. We give 5 practical things that really are going to help you as you think about this, no matter what parenting season you're in.
That's right. And also, maybe you have a young teenage kid that you want to listen to this episode with. I think this could be really powerful because the 5 things that we share are things that parents can do. And then we have 5 things that you can be teaching your young adults, your older teenagers to do that will also help them to stay on God's path.
One of the things we talk about is helping your kids have a really good list of qualities they're looking for in a spouse built over time, and then they develop their own list. But in that, I challenge Angie. I go, didn't I break your list a little bit? And she confessed that, I did break the list, but you'll have to listen to that. I also give some really important warnings, especially if you have daughters, dads. Like, you gotta have some tough conversations with potentials that are approaching your daughter and things you gotta talk about today that maybe in the past didn't need to be talked about, but you've got to do it. And then, what's Angie talking to ladies about that are looking at her sons in the future? So we get into all that. It's such a great episode. By the way, all show notes are courageousparenting.com, and the whole ministry is at becourageousministry.org. Every time you purchase, every time you give a 5-star rating, every time you donate, it enables us to further the mission to impact 10 million legacies. So be on the journey with us. Enjoy the show. I think we're hitting on a fear that a lot of parents have. Don't you think?
Oh, well, I know that you and I we've maybe not worried, but we've contemplated and talked about this concept. So we're going to ask you a question. Are you worried your kids won't find a spouse?
You're so intentional. You're raising up your kids, and sometimes it's hard to see potentialities around you.
That's right. Of course, you don't need to find their spouse when they're 6 or when they're 11.
True.
Right? There's time. And the friendships and relationships that they have are refining and helping prepare them for who they're going to be later in life. So it's really important that you are intentional as a parent with who you allow them to associate with.
And it's not necessarily somebody they grow up with or things like that.
Right.
But we're going to give you 4 things that are really important to help have fruitful outcomes with who your children marry.
We're actually we're excited because this is something that we have just evaluated ourselves and just something that we've talked about over the years a lot, especially as our kids have gotten older. For those of you who maybe are listening for the first time, I just want to say welcome to the Courageous Parenting Podcast. We're Isaac and Angie. And if you don't know this, we have been married for almost 26 years and we have 9 children that range in ages almost 25 down to 4. And so we have a few kids that are married and we have quite a few that are still living at home. So this is definitely a topic that obviously we think about, and that just even that thought prompts us to the very first point, which is to pray for your kids.
Yeah, it's so important to pray. And it's not that kind of prayer where it's doubtful and hopeless and needy, but powerful prayers for their future spouses, and that they're going to have a fruitful marriage and optimistic in those ways. Yeah.
So as we are preparing today's topic, we're going to give you guys like a little outline here. We're going to go over 4 to 5 things that parents can do to help their kids prepare their kids for marriage, but also prepare them for finding their spouse specifically. And then we have 4 to 5 things that kids can do to help themselves in walking in the path that God has for them. And so this first one that we're talking about today, which is prayer, this is something that I'm sure you guys have heard or been encouraged by other older couples. Hey, as soon as you have a baby, start praying for their future spouse. I'm sure that that's not an unknown idea to you, but it was like the first thing that we wrote down on the board. And I told Isaac, I said, this has probably been the thing that I have prayed for my kids more than anything else. And I pray about it a lot because we have 9 kids. And so from the time that even our firstborn was born, I was praying for her future spouse. And for each of our kids, in fact, I've written out prayers for those future spouses in a special little motherhood journal that I keep for myself. But I want to challenge you with something that maybe you haven't thought of before. And this is something that I recently shared with a close sister in Christ, whom I love, and I shared with her that years ago, when someone shared with me this idea of praying for your kid's future spouse, I thought to myself, well, I should be praying for their parents, actually, because their parents are going to mold them and influence them more than anybody else in this world. And so I didn't just stop at I'm going to pray for my daughter's husbands. I'm not just going to pray for my son's future wives. I'm going to pray for all those future in-laws. I'm going to pray specifically for those people that are molding them. And I would say that is probably even more impactful, more powerful, because I think that what it does is it actually prepares your heart as a parent to recognize that there is going to be another set of parents that are going to be influential in your kids' lives in their later years, right? And so you guys often hear us say, your kids are going to live approximately 20% of their life under your roof. You never stop being a parent. Obviously, the parenting relationship goes from more teaching and training to mentoring and friendship when they're older. And that's awesome. But I will say that it's important that as parents, you recognize, and not just like in your head. I mean, obviously, everybody goes, oh, yeah, my kid might get married one day and then they're going to have their spouse's parents in their life. Like everybody gets that, right? But to pray for your relationship with them, to pray specifically for them is really powerful. But that's something that you as a parent can do. And we want to encourage you to encourage your kids to also take on this first action step. And as soon as they're able to start praying, teach them this concept of praying for their future spouse.
It's so good. It's so good.
You've heard me talk about how we're members of Samaritan Ministries instead of having health insurance, which has been so helpful to our family over the last 5 years. But I wanted to share an update. They've recently launched Redeem Health Share, which we've now joined. We've also chosen to have Flex Share, which is an exclusive add-on feature where you can share for things like vision, dental, and preventative care. Redeem is a Samaritan Ministry program and has more program options to fit your budget and healthcare needs, all in a modern digital platform. Most importantly, Redeem upholds the same commitment that Samaritan Ministries has held for more than 30 years. Christians praying for one another and sharing medical needs together. Learn more at redeemhealthshare.org.
There's this debate that's out there, is there the one soulmate for each person that God has designed this one other person for?
Like he did in the creation story, right?
And
where he looks at Adam and he goes, it's not good you're alone. I'm going to make you a helper suitable for you.
Each person has this one other person that God is orchestrating for marriage someday and with the other person. And then there's the other belief, which is, no, you just have to make a wise choice and learn to love that person.
Love is a choice.
Over a long period of time. Yeah. And, you can't make a biblical argument strongly probably in either direction.
Yeah.
But I like the soulmate belief, even if I'm potentially wrong.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful. I think the other side can have some dangers to it, which is, just my opinion. But yeah, there was a time a long time ago where some people were influencing this idea of, no, you just got to get a godly person and then choose to love them, and you'll grow in love for them more and more over time. And I felt like it was such a settling belief. It was such a lowering expectations kind of belief. And I think it was based in fear, actually, as I look back, that there wasn't going to be these ideal mates for people. And I tend to believe the other way. We're raising our kids under the belief that God has somebody special for them out there. And they just need to do these things we're going to talk about, and God will reveal them in the right timing.
Yeah. I think that ultimately, when you're raising your kids, what you expect, and whether that's fears or hopeful expectations, really impacts your kids on if they struggle with fear or not, right? And so we could have even labeled today's podcast, are your kids worried that they won't find a spouse? Like maybe you have teenagers and they're like, I don't know anybody godly, Dad. I kind of feel like there's no good guys out there anymore. Or maybe you have sons that are like, where am I going to find a pure wife who wants to be a wife and a mom? And like the lamenting, I'll tell you, we have heard the lamenting. We have heard it. We have heard it from parents. We've heard it from young people. You've probably heard the term, all the good ones are taken. That's something that's been around even when we were young, right? And you look around sometimes depending on where you're located, and there might be a little bit of hopelessness in some situations. And so our second point, this is something parents can do. And as your kids get older, your kids can also do this as well. An older woman, a wise woman once told me this, and I didn't quite get what she meant until now, but we're labeling it location. Location, location, location. It's all about location.
Yeah.
You want to kind of share a little bit about that?
Well, I first want to say all the good ones are taken, just a response to that, which is my response is always, no, God has a plan for you, even though you can't see it in front of you. Mm-hmm. You just need to keep on doing your best, doing your passions, doing what God's calling you to do. And God is going to reveal that person in the right timing. Mm-hmm. And just having a faith and confidence in that, I think is so important. But on location, yes, are there things we can do? Absolutely. You need to be in location where you're likely to find like-minded people. Mm-hmm. That can include changing states you live in, actually. Yeah. That is something that was important to us. Yeah. That it could include changing what town you live in. That could definitely include what church you go to. And it's not that the person has to be in that church, but you want your children to be being raised up where the expectations are strong for biblical living. You want your children to be raised up in areas where they're not getting polluted by liberalism and wrong ideas and hot button issues. Right. And where a large portion of the Christian populace are still getting, convoluted, confused in their minds away from biblical truth. You don't want that. You want to give the best opportunity and be in the best locations you possibly can.
The truth is, you guys know, if you've been listening for a while, you know that we relocated almost 5 years ago. It's been 4.5 years already, from Oregon to Idaho. And we strategically relocated our family. We called it our legacy move. If you want to know more about that, you can go listen to one of our most popular podcast episodes called Why We Strategically Relocated. But I will say this one point that has to do with what we're talking about today is that some of our kids were starting to get older. Our son was interested in courting a young woman that he was certain she was going to be his wife, which she is his wife today. And her family was like-minded enough that they also were fleeing Oregon, and they ended up going to Montana. They went to a totally different state. So we didn't go to the same states, but the kids stayed in contact and they wrote letters, and that's a really cool story too. But I will say that, when your kids get to be that age and you start looking around and you're like, and this is not I don't want this to come across as prideful, but when you look around and you're kind of like, no one is like-minded enough. Some people might say no one's good enough. It's not the good enough. It's they're gonna be yoked. And especially for your daughters who have to, if you're modeling and teaching your kids a biblical marriage, which we're going to talk about, but if they are being taught that they're going to have to submit to their husband, and the husband has some wayward philosophies or has some non-like-minded theological convictions, there's going to be some division and disunity in your extended family, which makes Thanksgivings awkward. It makes Christmases, it makes forever awkwardness, right? And potential division in relationships and things like that, which is such a bummer. And so for us, we just looked around and we were like, yeah, our kids are, I just don't necessarily, and I can't advocate for them putting roots down here because we don't know what the laws are going to, can't put roots down. I don't know what the laws are going to be for homeschooling. Don't know what the medical freedom laws are, things like that. And so for us, because of our older kids, it was a legacy move, hoping that being in a location where there was more like-mindedness, even on the political level, they would be more likely, more apt to find a spouse that was more on that same trajectory as them. And so this is something I think parents can take ownership over, right? It's And you mentioned church. I think that there's a lot of things as parents. Like when I was talking to this older, wiser woman, this was many years ago. And at the time she had like 4 of her 7 sons were married. And I just said, how did you get so blessed? Like God has blessed you. They are married to all godly women. Like, how did you do that? And she sat across the table with a smile on her face and she said, it's important to be where they are. And I was like, what? And she was talking about location. And she was like, well, I'll give you an example. Right now, the oldest son currently living at home is interested in a girl that goes to this church and her dad's a pastor. So we are actually trying out that church. And they weren't the type of people that would change church to church. They were very faithful people who had been at a church for a very long time, but that church had split and they were churchless. And so they considered that because they saw her as a potential future spouse for their oldest son. And they wanted to build relationships with her and her family. And I went, okay. And then she gave me another example and she just said co-ops. Certain sports, certain activities, like what are they passionate about? Are they heavily involved in the pro-life movement? I mean, there's so many things. Like when you think about all the activities, communities that you're potentially a part of over the course of 20 years in raising a child, being strategic to be in a place with the kid with something that they're passionate about. Like if you have a kid that's passionate about pro-life, for example, and you start like being a part of the local pro-life organization and you're maybe doing stuff that's more statewide and you start getting more and more involved, they're going to find other people that are passionate about what they're passionate about.
I had a warning too. Sometimes you're in communities based on maybe the husband's career, maybe hobbies, interests, maybe from childhood friends that you're still friends with, things like that, that might not be the most fruitful for your kids in this regard. And so sometimes it also makes hard decisions and, thinking through things, and maybe where you live isn't the best thing because of influences and things like that. So there's a lot to think about, but location is a big deal. And the third one is teaching kids what to look for. I think this is huge because when they're young, you can model it, but you can also communicate about it. And then what's going to happen over time is they're going to develop their own list. They have their own convictions in. But that is a lot about the discipleship you did all of those years and what you modeled in your own marriage.
Proverbs 18:22 says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So clearly there is this like proactive looking that's happening on the part of the male, right? Where he who finds a wife finds a good thing. And teaching your kids that, I think that from the time that they're young, that there is this like clear understanding of like, if you are within God's path and you're within God's will, and you're just trying to follow the Lord and you're not doing things in your own will, but you're doing things in the Lord's will, then you're likely to meet and find the wife that is God's will for your life. And it's just interesting. I recently led a Bible study through Proverbs 31, which it starts out saying, an excellent wife who can find, right? It's literally like asking the question, like, who can find one? Which I think a lot of guys are probably asking themselves this question today. Who can find an excellent wife? I know that we've recently heard that as well. And it's like, yeah, it's a hard thing. Are there people out there that are actually raising their daughters to be virtuous, to be excellent wives? And I think that, teach your kids what to look for is also like, are you teaching them what to be, right? So it's like, for my daughters, I want to teach them what to be, model that, but also literally have conversations with them where like when you're discipling and when you're disciplining character, for example, it's like give them the bigger picture and go, one day you're going to be married and it's going to be very important that you have humility, that you can apologize, that you can forgive. That would be a character conversation I would have with both sons and daughters, because that across the board doesn't matter. Like every character quality crosses the board of gender lines, right? And so anytime that you're discipling or disciplining your children, to be going back to the word of God, to be building their character, but then also reminding them like this is an important quality to be looking for in a spouse, especially as they start to get older and they're in those like teenage years and they start noticing that the other gender is attractive and things like that. It's like, okay, but what's their character? Are you attracted to the outward appearance, or are you attracted to the heart? And
this is a big deal because you want to make sure your children aren't the ones that get fooled by charisma and good looks. And charisma and good looks is fleeting compared to the whole package. And while that'd be wonderful to have the good looks and the charisma or whatever,
it is fleeting,
whatever that means.
Yeah.
If it's backed by biblical character and like-minded, lifestyle choices and things like that. And I think that is to get the whole package is what you're looking for, what your kids should be looking for. And I think they need to be attracted. Absolutely. They need to have a great relational connection. They need to be in alignment on biblical things. And that's not too much to ask for. And sometimes it can feel like that. Well, where are they? No, don't be discouraged. Trust the Lord and live out your life with biblical excellence the best you can, growing in the Lord and pursuing the things God has called you to do, while having a very clear list in your mind of what the standard should be for somebody to come along. And then you have to look at that list and go, am I being that list? Because you're only going to attract what you are.
Right. And so I think that when you're talking about you're teaching your kids what to look for, that's something that parents can do in parenting their kids, right? So you're going to talk about character, you're going to talk about convictions, you're going to talk about beliefs. You mentioned that. But also having the conversation about legacy, right? And this is, we talk about legacy. Last week's podcast was all about leaving a faith-filled legacy. It was all about leaving a new legacy. And so you got to go listen to last week's podcast. But here's the thing. Part of the legacy is that your kids would also have the conviction to be intentional about the legacy they're leaving with their children. And so understanding that who they do choose, because we all have a choice in life who we marry. Actually, I mean, not all. There are some countries that do arranged marriages still. But in America, largely, you have a choice in who you marry. And so being able to choose someone who is already forward thinking, I want to be an intentional biblical parent. What does that look like? Some of the same potential convictions, like for our kids. Yeah, homeschooling is one of those things that we teach our kids. Like, you're going to need to find a wife that is wanting to homeschool her kids, and that is like, it's really high up on the list because of the way that society is today, because of what's being taught, but also because of peer influence. And it's literally a legacy game changer. And so like, teach your kids what to look for, but then the thing that your kids can do is they can create the non-negotiable list, right? And you can help guide them, but it needs to be their idea. So as over the years, you've been having these conversations, warm-up conversations, giving little ideas, having conversations with them. Then once they get to be like preteen, teen years, you start encouraging them to make their non-negotiable list. And then maybe you start going over that with them and you go, oh, hey, maybe that's a little bit too strict. Oh, have you thought biblically? I think that you can have a higher standard than that, and you go back and forth, you challenge your kids, but it really needs to be their idea. And it needs to be their convictions. And so this is super important because this shows you where the gaps are in your discipleship with your kids, actually. And it's just crazy important. One of those convictions, we believe, is in 2 Corinthians 6:14. It says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? And so this scripture is often used in regards to marriage and not being unequally yoked. And, some people would say unequally yoked would be like a believer and an unbeliever. That would be unequally yoked, right? But I think that there's even this level of like spiritual maturity, right? When sometimes, and I've witnessed this a few times personally and heard of this many times online, that sometimes girls will like believe so much in the guy that that the guy's actually a project, but they believe in the hope of what they can be so much that they jump into marriage versus waiting for the guy to rise up and prove that he is going to be spiritually mature. And then there's like an unequal yoking of spiritual maturity. And then there's this struggle in their marriage for nearly their whole marriage, if not the whole marriage. So I think that like during the period of time leading up to the marriage, all those kinds of things need to be talked about. It needs to be like dug in deep, where it's like you're having the conversations about spiritual maturity, and it definitely needs to be a standard.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and the next one is we got to model biblical marriage. I'm curious, Angie, though, because I feel like you had a really strict list about who you wanted to marry.
Yeah.
And I felt like I didn't quite hit some of those marks potentially on your list.
It's interesting.
I'm just curious what you would say to that.
Well, I think when we before we were dating, my list was I'm not marrying a man, right? And so I actually didn't have a list.
She wasn't going to marry anybody.
I wasn't going to marry anybody.
Clarify.
Yeah. And so it was kind of like I was going to be a single missionary, celibate, no kids. I was going to go overseas. And so I didn't actually.
Were you scared of having a family?
Oh, 100%.
What made you scared of having a family?
Well, because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. Like none of what we have done over the last 26 years was ever on my radar. Like I was not homeschooled. Homeschooling was not my radar. I would have never considered it. I tried to talk myself out of it a bazillion times. So I mean, everything that we've decided to do over the years is very different than how I thought our life
So this
would
is
be.
a good topic, because sometimes children, young adults can get a list that is unrealistic.
Or not necessarily what they're gonna actually be living out later in life, right? And so if I would have had the vision, I'll just use Megan for an example right now, because she was just recently talking to me about how her dream of she wants to have a homestead, and she wants to have land. Beautiful. And raise her kids and all these things. But part of the reason why she wants that, it's not that it's just some trendy thing, it's that she grew up a large portion of her life, that's what we've been doing. And she sees how beautiful it can be. And so she wants what was modeled for her. And she, Lord willing, she's going to do even better than I have done at this. And I know she will.
Does, yeah.
I know she will. But I bring this up because homesteading, for example, was not something on my radar. I wasn't looking for a guy who knew how to run tractors and plant trees, and you did not know those things. So if I would have had that on my non-negotiable list of I want to live in the country and I want land, which I did not at the time, if I would have had that on my list, that would have been a big no on Isaac, because you also didn't want it. Mm-hmm. But that's how when you're younger, your non-negotiable list would change. If I was older and I had lived life a little bit longer, I might have had an even bigger non-negotiable list.
So
it
needs
different.
To stay more on godly character qualities, real relationship
not these
with God.
Lifestyle things. Yeah.
But some of the lifestyle things like homeschooling are important.
They are.
And
we believe that that's important for legacy, although we didn't see that in our generation back 26 years ago.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But it is a different world now.
It is. And I think that more people realize it now.
That's a good thing for legacy.
For sure. I think more people realize it more now than they did before. Proverbs 29:25 says, "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." It's interesting. The verse right before it says, "The partner of a thief hates his own life. He hears the curse, but discloses nothing." The partner of a thief. I just think of marriage. You're in a partnership. The partner of a thief. It's like if you're married to somebody who has the character of a thief, right? Or is lacking godliness. It's like that. Then you're going to hate your own life because you're yoked to that person. It just brings that up again. Even though this isn't talking specifically about marriage, I do believe that this applies. And I think that when kids really struggle, when I say kids, I mean even young adults. I'm just getting older. But when young people struggle with the fear of am I going to find somebody? And maybe they start to rationalize that they're going to settle for less, which I've heard people do all the time, where they're like, I just don't know if there's going to be a guy that's pure mom. I don't know if there are any guys that have never struggled with porn. I don't know if there are any guys that you hear women lamenting. I do. We hear guys lamenting yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a wife that wants to be a wife. Everybody's so independent minded, career focused, they don't want to be at home with their kids. And so it's if you operate in fear, what does the Bible say right here? I mean, fear is fear, right? So the fear of man, this is specifically talking about like fearing men, but also the fear that men struggle with, right? And so obviously this topic is a fear that man and women struggle with. It says the fear of man lays a snare. How could it lay a snare? A snare being a trap, a temptation. I think of trap, snare, temptation. I think that if you are struggling with the fear that you're not going to find someone, it lays the temptation for you to settle for less.
Don't settle.
And it literally, but then here's the opposite. The very next part of that verse, same verse says, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. So it's like, don't allow the worry and the disappointment of what you see around you in the culture to become a temptation for you to settle for less if you know that if your list is not like this, like impossible list.
There are so many families now raising up their kids in intentional ways.
Yeah.
There is so many that you should be encouraged. We have a bird's eye view into it.
It's true.
And you should just be encouraged. You should trust the Lord, but you do need to equip your kids to know what to look for and what are the non-negotiables and to not settle. I can't emphasize that enough because once they start, people start liking them and they start, entertaining the idea of the possibility of certain people.
Or they just really want to move into the next season of their life, right?
Next season, sometimes they're going to overlook and go, well, he's better than he's better than so and so. He's better than this.
The last guy.
I mean, at least I think he'll read his Bible. It's like they start to second guess and struggle with that. And I think for the ladies that you're raising up, your daughters, you really need to make sure they're expecting a spiritual leader. And they don't have to embody all aspects and experience of leading spiritually because they don't when they're young necessarily, but they need to there needs to be evidence that they love the Lord. There needs to be evidence
that they're seeking
Him. They're wielding the sword of the Spirit in the Bible and that the desire to be spiritual leaders, they believe in biblical gender roles in a healthy way. And that they're pursuing that and they're looking for that themselves. I think that's important.
Yeah. Hey guys, I want to share with you about a program we've been loving at the Tolpin household. Studies by University of Arkansas, Ohio State, and American Psychological Association and more show that preteens who participate in art show increased brain activity in areas responsible for focus, planning, and critical thinking. That's why we're partnering with Creating a Masterpiece. They offer award-winning online art programs for ages 4 to 104. Get on-demand access to drawing programs, art lessons, art history, watercolors, charcoal, sketches, and so much more. And all at one low rate for your entire household. Just a lesson or two a week can nourish your child's brain in a really powerful way. So visit creatingamasterpiece.com to sign up today. That's creatingamasterpiece.com because anyone can create a masterpiece. Looking for a math curriculum that actually works? Meet CTC Math. It's a full K-12 curriculum that's flexible, effective, and designed to make sense. The secret? Short, engaging video lessons that break down tricky concepts into easy-to-understand steps. Whether you're homeschooling or just need a supplement, CTC Math fits your routine, not the other way around. And with 24/7 access to all lessons from all grades, your kids can learn anytime and anywhere. Ready to take the stress out of math? Visit ctcmath.com and start your free trial today. That's ctcmath.com. Confidence in math that starts here. Well, the fourth thing that, we have kind of identified that parents can do. So the first thing is to pray for the future spouses of your kids and their parents. Then location. And that's not just like where you live, although that could be part of it. It could also be what involvement do you have in what activities, what communities are you a part of, even work. That was a really good insight. What influences around your kids that are potentially going to influence their non-negotiable list to not even be a non-negotiable. Maybe it becomes a negotiable list where it's like, oh, well, that's not that important because they're around people who just don't even care.
They don't value it.
And so it's really important that you think about like the location of your family and the different involvement that you have in different things. And then teaching your kids what to look for, super important. And then the fourth thing is to model biblical marriage yourself. Like for your kids to look at your marriage, not that you're perfect, because we are far from perfect. But I would hope that my kids would go, I want to have a faithful marriage like mom and dad. Like I see mom submitting to dad's leadership. I see dad purposefully leading, but he's a servant leader, and like just able to identify or even like look up to and go, I want to be like that in this way, or I want to be like that in this way. And I think that that's a really healthy thing to try to purposefully as parents to try to model biblical marriage, model forgiving, model humility, modeling servanthood, modeling faithfulness, steadfastness, all of those things, right?
I think that you just hit something that's probably a negative chord for some wives maybe listening, is that maybe their husbands aren't spiritual leaders. And this could be a discouraging moment in the episode. And I just want to encourage you that God can do all kinds of things. And maybe this is a good marriage discussion to have, because maybe the husband hasn't really thought about what he's sowing in the legacy of passivity. And, the daughters are going to look for somebody often, much like their dad. And so we've got to lead spiritually. It's just a non-negotiable. If you're listening, gents, you got to do it. And the motivation is much bigger. You got to look at the much bigger reasons, which is the marriages down the road and the health of those and who they choose to marry, and to make that an important thing they're looking for. And so I just think it's so important. Guys, you got to get motivated. And when you're motivated, you learn how to do things.
It just hit me. We've talked a lot about how people leave a legacy, whether they're unintentional or intentional, right? So like we leave a legacy even with our sin, and blind spots and things like that. But when you were talking about men leading spiritually, it just hit me. I think that men lead regardless of if they're being intentional or not. It's just that what they're leading is either self-focused or it's selfless, right? Like it's either intentional or unintentional, but they're leading regardless because they're the dad. So it's like if they're the dad, then they're either leading in passivity or they're leading in purposefulness. They're either leading in spiritual things or they're leading in not talking about spiritual things. Like it's literally you're leading all the time. It's just a matter of what you're leading. Like, are you leading in making an idol out of sports? Or are you leading in making an idol out of hunting and fishing? Or are you literally like even are you leading in the importance of prayer or seeking wise counsel? Like when your kids watch you, are you living transparently enough that they see you go seek wise counsel and they go, oh, my dad was humble enough to go get wise counsel? Like that's a thing that men do.
And then this concept comes up of like, well, I was never taught. I've never seen it modeled. I don't know what to do. And I understand, but I also don't understand because there's 31 Proverbs and it's just such simple language and it's so easy. And what leadership looks like is read and maybe say something about it. Also, prayer. Well, I have never prayed in front of my wife, or I haven't prayed. Well, if you've never shot a basketball before, does it mean you're never going to? So come on. It's like, this is more important than knowing how to shoot a basketball.
It's about what kind of legacy you're leaving.
This is a big deal. Let's not make it lofty. It's not. It's just simple. And I'm thinking about this as, I'm thinking about a lot of things from a pastor's standpoint in the church and things like that. I'm like, wow, there's this really big roadblock that is like preventing me from even wanting to launch discipleship in a way that I think is most effective for the church. Like there's these very simple barriers in Christian culture that are blocking the most simplistic, idyllic way that discipleship should happen through the church. And I'm not going to get into it, but this is it right here.
It starts with the husband leading.
Yeah.
Is really what it starts with. And so here's the deal. Like if we want our sons to be prepared to be spiritual leaders in their home, then dad has to do it. Otherwise, what you're modeling for him is to be not a spiritual leader.
And a legacy of non-spiritual leaders.
That's like stab to the heart. Not only that, but I think about the woman, right? Like wisdom and kindness is on her tongue, right? Or she does him good all the days of her life. I think of books like The Power of a Praying Wife, The Power of a Praying Mom. Like if you don't pray and you don't pray for your kids, with your kids, over your kids, they're never going to expect that from their wife. They're never going to expect that from their wife to be that kind of mom in the future. So then what you're going to do is you're going to potentially set them up for a legacy of never having women praying over their kids or for their kids, which is like literally the main game changer. Prayer is a reflection of how much you trust the Lord, actually. Like if you're not taking time, if you don't see the importance of praying, you're not seeing the importance of taking something to God and trusting him with it. Actually, it's a really, really big deal, which is the next point. The next point is to trust the Lord, right? And so Proverbs 3:4-5 says, so you will find good favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Someone who doesn't pray is leaning on their own understanding. Someone who's praying is trusting in the Lord. And so trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. So in all your ways would include also all your thoughts about who you're going to marry and all the decisions you're going to make about who you're going to marry, who you're going to follow, how you're going to lead, what kind of wife and mom you're going to be. In all your ways, acknowledge him, Christ, God, and he does something. He makes straight your path. You don't make your path straight. God does it. It requires you to do something first, acknowledge him, and then he does something else. And so this is like just, it kind of like full circle, trust the Lord, full circle back up to our number one, which was prayer, right?
Here's some warnings, some unprecedented times, really big warnings, is we're just going to say it again. Make sure your kids are really equipped not to settle for less than what they are hoping that God will bring them. And God is faithful, and there are wonderful people out there. The second thing is make sure that pornography is not something that is in your legacy, meaning that dads, if someone wants to pursue your daughter, whenever that meeting happens, you got to have the meeting. You got to ask the porn question. You got to ask, their sexual past questions. You've got to dig in and build relationship. But yeah, you got to ask the tough questions. And by the way, I'm not looking for perfection because I'm not perfect. I became a believer when I was 23. I understand the wayward ways of the world and the traps and all these things. And so, but I just want to know that they're not in it.
Actively engaged in sin
that God is taking them out of that.
Right.
And if God is not taking them out of that, they are not qualified.
Or they're not ready.
They're not ready.
They may not be ready yet. They may be ready down the line, but just not yet. And it's like, then you have the conversation where it's like, you got to work on this.
Yeah, it's helpful. You be helpful.
And so it's literally like a caring about them, because if you put them in the marriage, they're also going to really fumble and stumble, and it's going to be a hard life for them. And there's two verses that we want to share with you. But before I do share these last two verses that are going to be hugely encouraging, if you're a young person that's listening and you're like, there are no good guys out there, I have two verses of hope for you that I want to share with you here in a second. But another unprecedented times tip. So Isaac talked about, like, as the head of the household, being the covering and the protection over your daughter and having a conversation with that potential suitor and basically interviewing them. I just think that this is something that, like, dads, it is on your job description, and it's totally understandable that you would have that hard conversation with the guy. And if the guy isn't ready for it, then he's not, and he fumbles and he's scared and he's like not able to answer your questions, or he runs the other way, like, that's on him. But someone who's going to be like-minded to marry your daughter and is going to rise up and be a spiritual leader is going to have more respect for you because you asked them those hard questions. And they're going to notice that the reason why you ask them those questions is because you love your daughter that much, that you're going to protect your daughter that much, that you're not going to let her just jump into a relationship with a guy who's completely addicted to porn. That's going to potentially, like, that is adultery, right? And so, like, for a dad to love his daughter enough, it should be commonplace and anticipated, expected that dads today would have that conversation with every young man that is potentially interested in their daughters.
Yes.
You know, like it should just be this.
What about the gals though, for the sons?
Well, that's the thing. Like I was just even thinking about, we only have one son that's married so far. We have 6 more sons. But in that situation was pretty chill and easy peasy because we
kind of knew all about them.
We knew their family well enough to know that they were raised really like-minded. And Caroline she was just so verbal in expressing what her dreams were about being a wife and a mom. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, she's going to be perfect for our son.
But we have all these sons coming up. What are your thoughts?
Right, exactly. And so I almost think that like it should also be this commonplace thing where as the potential future mother-in-law or older Titus II woman in a young girl's life that, you know, her son is potentially interested. I think obviously in these situations, because the man is going to be the leader, I think I'm going to share something with you that I think is ideal and something that's probably not common. Okay. I think what's ideal is that the dad would have a close, tight relationship with his son, and that both the mom and the dad have really done a good job teaching the son what to look for in a wife. Like he is taking the warning of King Lemuel's mother and realizing charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And he's literally like looking for the long-term game plan here, right? And so I have full trust, at least in my oldest 3 sons that are here at home, that they would be searching for something that is biblical. And I have like peace about that. Like, just even having a conversation with Drew last week where he's like, I don't think a guy should be dating unless he's got a job and is like ready to be able to provide for a woman. It's like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? It's like, why would you like rise up and be a man, like move into that season next, right? And but this is the thing, like that's why it's those kinds of conversations where he says stuff like that, which Austin used to say.
Yeah.
And that helps me as a mom to trust that if he does have eyes for a girl, like I know he's got his non-negotiables. I know he's not choosing somebody who's like, I'm throwing him in public school. I'm doing this. I'm going to like total opposite of maybe how we've raised them. And like, I have that trust. But so as far as like the female integrating into the family, I think that it's more of a relational thing where like I would pursue to build a relationship with her and get to know her. It's less of a like interview like you would have with the guys who should be strong enough if they're going to be a leader.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good distinction.
But I do think so that's ideal. I think that there's like an uncommon potential or a more common situation, right? Where maybe the guys don't think the way they should. And they just want a girlfriend and they just want to date. And as a mom, you're sitting there going, you're like King Lemuel's mom going, son, don't give your strength to women. Like, you know.
I like the family dynamic too, is like they also know that they're going to be bringing someone over potentially if they're serious.
Yes.
And there's a whole bunch of wisdom around the Tolpin family.
Well, and they've kind of like invited each other, like, what do you think?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And there's a desire for the family to be positive.
Right.
Which is cool.
And friends. And so I think that's one reason why bigger families are really helpful, actually, because people see different things and have different insights into things, which can be helpful. But I do think that like as a potential future mother-in-law, it is important to start building that relationship in a very loving kind of, I'm here to be a Titus II woman in your life, but not super pushy, not super shovey, but like when they ask for information, then you give it.
So let's not be worried about our kids finding spouses, but let's take action and equip them and prepare them and help them be the kind of people that would attract somebody that's godly and great character and like-minded in all kinds of ways. And most importantly, you're just going to raise up their own kids to love the Lord and equip them and be intentional and diligent and resilient too, right? So
and patient. I mean, it's going to take patience.
So let's not be worried, but let's take action.
Yeah, that's
and let's trust the Lord. And let's not be trusting the Lord without action, because that's just foolishness.
Right.
You do have a huge responsibility.
You do have to go out, and you do have to go out and find a wife. Like we read that verse, right? It's like they're not going to just show up on your doorstep. You can't just like homeschool your kids and leave your kids at home all the time and expect that your sons are going to find a wife or that your daughters are going to find a husband. So it's like they do have to go out. Location is important. You're not going to find a spiritual leader at a bar, right? Like you find one at a church, at a Bible study, maybe friends of other friends at a wedding or something like that. But I want to share Romans 15:13 as a final verse for you guys, as a word of encouragement. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may abound in hope. I just hope that you have hope, that you don't settle for less, that your kids don't settle for less, but that they abound with hope, that they have joy and peace in believing that God has someone for them and that they could be praying for them. And this can be truly such a fun and God-glorifying experience. But I think more than anything, if there's one thing that you can teach your kids, one thing, Isaac, one thing that we have tried to talk to our kids is that marriage is not about you. It's about God. And so if your kids get that they get that their life isn't about them, it's about God, and they find somebody else who believes the same thing. They love Jesus that much that they realize their life is not about them, it's about God. Then when they're yoked together, it changes everything.
And thanks for joining us.